On the night of July 22nd, 1991, in the city of Eastville, as everyone was drifting into a deep sleep, two patrolling police officers unexpectedly encountered a man running toward them in panic, pleading for help. He was unclothed, with handcuffs still on his wrist, and his body bore several clearly visible bruises.
"Please help me. He was going to kill me."
His voice trembled, and his eyes showed utter terror. Sensing something was wrong, the police officers immediately offered assistance and followed the man's directions. And from there, they unintentionally uncovered a horrifying secret about a killer whose name would send shivers down America's spine. This criminal didn't just kill like usual. He did things none of us could ever imagine. So what exactly did this man go through? Was his escape just luck, or did the killer deliberately release his prey for the thrill of the hunt? Subscribe to our channel to explore this story with us right after this. Eastville, the setting of the incident, a city known for its ancient streets intertwined with modern skyscrapers. It is densely populated and serves as an important economic center in the region. This place brings together people from all walks of life, and cases of people disappearing without a trace frequently occur. It seems the bustling, prosperous facade of Eastville conceals dark secrets beneath. The crime serves as a terrifying warning, making the locals anxious and fearful of what might lurk in the shadows of their city. Returning to the incident, at first, when the two officers saw the man, they thought he might be a pervert fleeing from somewhere. They quickly approached, cautiously restrained him, and began questioning. But when they saw him stammering, trembling, and pleading out of sheer fear, they decided to look into it further. The man introduced himself as Tracy Edwards. He had just escaped from the apartment of a strange man. According to Tracy, that evening, he went to a familiar bar with two friends. At the bar, they met a white, gay man who was handsome and appeared generous. He suggested that Tracy's group come to his apartment for drinks and to take some provocative photos, offering each of them $100. The group initially hesitated, but in the end, only Tracy agreed. Upon entering the apartment, Tracy immediately sensed a cold, eerie atmosphere. The apartment was small but messy, filled with an unpleasant stench that made him feel something was wrong. He also noticed several bottles of hydrochloric acid on the living room floor, a chemical rarely found in an ordinary apartment. While Tracy was still curious about the place, the strange man turned on the TV and invited him to watch a horror movie. Tracy was somewhat uneasy, but they continued talking. Then, suddenly, the man pulled out a pair of handcuffs and said he wanted to try a fun game. With an easygoing personality, Tracy agreed and let the man handcuff one of his wrists, as he had encountered partners with a preference for violence in same-sex relationships before. They both walked into the bedroom, where the stench grew even stronger. In the corner of the room, Tracy saw a blue plastic container, and it seemed the smell originated from there. Despite feeling uneasy, he tried to stay calm and lay on the bed as instructed. While lying on the bed, the man suddenly pulled out a gleaming knife, flashed a strange smile, and told him to take off all his clothes. At this moment, Tracy sensed imminent danger, but with one hand handcuffed, he could barely escape, so he complied. Pretending to stay calm, Tracy asked the man to remove the handcuffs, explaining that he would cooperate better if he was free. After considering for a moment, the man seemed to believe in Tracy's cooperation, relaxed his guard, and set the knife down on the bed. He then began undressing himself. Tracy gradually realized the extreme danger posed by this man. At the peak of the encounter, the man leaned close to him, rested his head on Tracy's chest, and whispered, "Your heart is beating so fast. I'll eat this heart." These horrifying words shook Tracy, but he tried to hide his fear, laughing it off as if everything was fine. Tracy kept talking to the man to distract him, all while sweating as he thought of an escape plan. He noticed the main door wasn't locked, only slightly closed. When the man let his guard down, Tracy abruptly shoved him away. Then he bolted toward the apartment door, breaking the latch in his rush, not daring to look back, knowing every step was a chance to survive. Tracy escaped the apartment complex. Although he had no clothes on, he frantically searched for help until he encountered two police officers. After hearing Tracy's story, the officers were horrified. They decided to accompany him back to apartment 213 on the second floor of the complex. Upon arrival, they knocked, and a white man with a calm demeanor opened the door. The officers asked him to explain Tracy's accusations. The man admitted to handcuffing Tracy but explained that the key was in the bedroom. Noticing the man's calm, somewhat strange demeanor, along with the suspicious details Tracy had mentioned, the two officers exchanged glances and cautiously stepped inside the apartment. The apartment was dimly lit, with a heavy, indescribable odor lingering, sharp and stifling. One officer decided to check the bedroom for the key, as the man had claimed, while the other remained, eyes fixed on him. When the officer opened the drawer next to the bed, he froze. A stack of photos lay inside. His professional instincts told him they could be photos of human body parts. Within moments, he confirmed the images were real. Without needing any further evidence, the officer drew his gun and subdued the man in front of him, signaling his partner to call for additional support immediately. When the backup team arrived, the two officers continued searching the apartment while the man was already restrained. They opened the refrigerator in the living room and were instantly chilled to the bone. Inside was a freshly severed head, its eyes wide open as if still alive. It was the head of an African-American man. The officers looked at the apartment's owner in shock, but he showed almost no reaction. He simply said, "I did all of that. I deserve to die. Please arrest me." His cold admission intensified the tense, haunting atmosphere. The police force began to seal off the entire apartment, and a more thorough search was initiated. On the stove they found some cooked meat. Besides the head in the refrigerator, they also found multiple internal organs and several parts of an arm, all carefully preserved. The sight surpassed every horror the officers had ever encountered in their lives. Continuing their search, they found a total of 11 skulls. There were 4 in the living room and 7 more in the bedroom. Some were bleached, while others were painted in strange colors, as if they were part of a grotesque collection on display. Even more frightening, in the bedroom, there was a blue plastic container filled with acid. Upon inspection, they found dismembered human body parts piled inside the container. Additionally, the police found 2 complete human skeletons, a pair of severed hands, and male genitalia, all carefully stored. They continued to open plastic bags in the apartment and discovered a total of 80 horrifying photos, documenting the entire dismemberment process of the victims. The crime scene was so horrific that a forensic investigator described the apartment as more of a crime museum than an actual crime scene. The identity of the man was quickly confirmed. His name was Jeffrey Dahmer, 31 years old, born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee. His father was Lionel Dahmer, and his mother was Joyce Dahmer. Jeffrey had been a lively and cheerful child. However, after a hernia surgery at the age of 4, everything seemed to change. The prolonged pain and recovery caused Jeffrey to become quiet and withdrawn from society. When Jeffrey was 6, his younger brother was born, and the Dahmer family began moving frequently. The birth of his brother made Jeffrey even more reclusive. He felt his parents were biased and that his brother had taken all their love. With each move, he felt more isolated in unfamiliar environments, which made Jeffrey feel weary. From here, he accidentally found a new source of joy: animal bones. Discovering animal skeletons left in the nearby woods, he became fascinated by studying their structures. Jeffrey collected insect remains and skulls of small animals, carefully preserving them in jars of formaldehyde. He also expressed his passion by killing small animals around the house and collecting their bones as trophies. During his teenage years, Jeffrey began to show increasingly isolated behavior. Without friends, he was immersed in his own world. By the age of 14, he started having dark urges involving corpses and murder. This coincided with his parents' turbulent divorce, with constant arguments making Jeffrey lose the sense of security he once felt at home. At 14, he started drinking alcohol. As he grew older, his alcohol consumption increased beyond control. Long drinking binges left Jeffrey lost, leading him to drop out after just 1 semester at Ohio State University. Jeffrey's twisted nature and distorted psyche grew day by day, and he was only waiting for an opportunity to satisfy his desires. In June 1978, Jeffrey was driving on a small, deserted road when he spotted a shirtless young man walking along the side of the road. Mesmerized by the man's appearance and muscles, Jeffrey slowly pulled up beside him and asked if he needed a ride. The young man gladly got in, unaware that this would be his final journey. After a brief conversation, Jeffrey learned that the young man was named Stephen Hicks, 18, from Ohio, and that he was on his way to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park. At that moment, Jeffrey devised a plan and invited Stephen to his home for a few drinks before taking him to the concert. Stephen, without any suspicion, agreed to the invitation. Once at Jeffrey's home, they began drinking and talking. Stephen told Jeffrey about the beautiful women he knew, but Jeffrey showed little interest. His attention was solely on Stephen. Jeffrey desperately wanted to keep Stephen all to himself, but understood that if he suggested staying, Stephen would certainly refuse. After talking for a while, Stephen stood up, excusing himself to leave in time for the concert. Jeffrey tried to convince Stephen to stay, but Stephen declined. Slightly intoxicated, as Stephen staggered to his feet, Jeffrey suddenly grabbed a heavy dumbbell nearby and struck Stephen hard on the head. Stephen was dazed, unable to react, and collapsed to the ground. Wasting no time, Jeffrey quickly strangled him until he stopped breathing. After killing Stephen, Jeffrey remained completely calm and showed no fear. Instead, he felt a thrill at having captured his prey. He removed the victim's clothes and began performing disturbing acts with the corpse. The next day, with morbid curiosity, Jeffrey continued exploring Stephen's body in his basement, burying the remaining parts in the backyard. However, a few weeks later, noticing children playing near the burial site, Jeffrey feared being discovered. He decided to dig up Stephen's remains, dissolve the flesh in acid, and crush the bones into powder with a hammer, scattering them throughout the nearby woods. What once was Stephen Hicks was now just a dark secret Jeffrey kept hidden in his heart. In July 1978, Jeffrey's father returned home, only to find his son constantly drunk. Disappointed, Lionel used his connections to enroll Jeffrey at Ohio State University, one of the region's top universities. But Jeffrey showed no interest in studying. He neglected classes and drowned himself in alcohol. Lionel eventually visited Jeffrey at school and found his dorm filled with alcohol. Finally, Jeffrey dropped out after only 3 months. Determined not to give up on his son, Lionel continued trying to help him and pushed Jeffrey into the military, hoping he would find discipline and a future. In January 1979, Jeffrey enlisted in the U.S. Army as a medic, but his drinking habits didn't subside. By early 1981, Jeffrey was discharged due to repeated violations of unit rules. He returned to Ohio. The Dahmer family quickly realized his condition had deteriorated to an uncontrollable state. Jeffrey's parents decided to send him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, a suburb of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, hoping that under her love, he could improve himself and separate from the vices he was entangled in. At his grandmother's house, Jeffrey had a fresh start. She loved him dearly, trying to help him quit drinking and taking him to church every week. Jeffrey also took on newspaper delivery work to keep himself busy. However, his grandmother's efforts were merely a temporary solution for a mind filled with darkness, waiting to erupt. After a short time, he was once again involved in allegations related to children and was subsequently fired. By January 1985, Jeffrey was hired as a bartender at a bar. There, he was captivated by the handsome, charming male patrons. This reignited his twisted desires. Jeffrey gradually began frequenting gay venues where he could freely approach men he was interested in without attracting much attention. Always seeking new thrills in life, Jeffrey once secretly stole a male mannequin from a store, brought it home, and hid it in his closet to use as his partner. However, this behavior did not escape his grandmother's notice. Upon discovering it, she demanded he immediately get rid of the mannequin and firmly forbade him from engaging in such actions. Despite this, every night, Jeffrey secretly brought home male friends he met at the bar. After bringing them to his room, he would secretly slip sleeping pills into their drinks, waiting for them to fall completely unconscious before engaging in intimate acts. This way, he could fully control his partners without encountering any resistance. However, the thrill and satisfaction from this control only lasted for a while. Jeffrey soon began craving a more intense sense of possession. A bizarre thought crossed his mind when he read an article about the death of a young man, prompting Jeffrey to secretly take a shovel to the cemetery late at night, intending to dig up a grave and possess the corpse. But after a few shovel strikes, he realized the ground was too hard, making his insane plan impossible to carry out. Reluctantly, Jeffrey had to abandon the idea. By September 1985, Jeffrey was arrested again for indecent behavior in public. This incident not only damaged his image further, but also resulted in a 1-year probation as a final warning from the law. However, despite being under supervision, his dark thoughts never ceased. In November 1987, on a misty evening, Jeffrey happened to meet Stephen Tuomi at a bar. Stephen, a young man from Michigan, had no idea this encounter would lead him into an inescapable nightmare. Jeffrey was captivated by Stephen's dashing appearance, using money and sweet talk to persuade him to come to a hotel with him. At the hotel, Jeffrey slipped sedatives into Stephen's drink, waiting until he was completely unconscious. Jeffrey then acted out his fantasies of absolute control, but this time, it seemed he had gone a bit too far. The next morning, Stephen's body was cold and stiff, his chest covered in bruises and blood seeping from the corners of his mouth. Jeffrey showed no signs of panic, as this was not his first time. He bought a large suitcase, carefully placing Stephen's body inside, making sure no one would suspect anything. Afterward, he took Stephen's body back to his grandmother's house, tightly wrapping it in plastic to prevent any odor from escaping. A week later, he secretly went down to the basement late at night, dismembering Stephen's body into small pieces, placing them in plastic bags, dissolving the flesh in acid, and using a hammer to crush the bones until they were fragmented. His cold-blooded composure with each hammer strike revealed his intent to maintain complete control over everything. He disposed of all body parts, but kept the head as a trophy. He soaked it in Soilex, a high-alkaline industrial cleaning solution mixed with bleach. Then he cooked it and stripped off the decomposed flesh. However, the skull became brittle and didn't meet his expectations, so he decided to smash it. Jeffrey realized that Soilex was the ideal solution for disposing of bodies without producing an overwhelming stench. From then on, he began developing a process for disposing of future victims. Jeffrey did more than just dispose of bodies. He kept bones or other parts as souvenirs. His bloodlust had now transformed into a sick, uncontrollable craving. 2 months later, on January 16, 1988, Jeffrey Dahmer found a new target at a familiar bar. This man, named James Doxtator, was a 14-year-old from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jeffrey approached him with an offer to pose for photographs in exchange for $50. Unable to resist the promised money, James agreed to go with Dahmer to his apartment. At the apartment, Jeffrey used his usual tactic, spiking the drink, waiting for the victim to pass out, then strangling him to death, followed by assaulting the body. He dismembered it and kept the head, bleaching the bones to preserve them as a macabre trophy. Over time, he continued using similar methods to lure and kill many other victims within the gay community. His collection grew increasingly diverse. Some skulls were even painted in garish, haunting colors. By April 1988, Jeffrey found another target. He brought this gay man home, preparing to act as he had done before. However, just as he was about to begin, a voice called from outside the door. "Jeffrey, are you all right?" It was his grandmother's voice. Jeffrey was startled, hesitated, and had to abandon his intent to kill. In a panic, he threw the half-conscious man out onto the street. To avoid suspicion, he even carefully escorted the man to the hospital afterward. After this incident, Jeffrey's grandmother noticed a foul odor emanating from his room, and that strange visitors were frequently coming late at night. Unable to tolerate it any longer, she decided to evict Jeffrey from her home. Forced to leave his place of residence, Jeffrey rented a small apartment at 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By September 1988, Jeffrey was accused of luring a 13-year-old boy into his apartment with malicious intent. The boy managed to escape and immediately reported Jeffrey to the police. This time, Jeffrey was arrested. When subjected to psychological evaluation, experts confirmed that he exhibited signs of schizoid and impulsive personality disorders, along with limited trust in others and extreme tendencies toward introversion. By January 1989, After a tense trial process, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of second-degree assault and sentenced to 1 year in prison with 5 years of probation. However, this sentence was not enforced until May 1989, and during his temporary detention, Jeffrey was allowed a few days of release for Easter. Returning home in March, he only seemed stable for a short while before delving further into crime. On March 25, 1989, less than a week after his temporary release, Jeffrey struck again. This time, he targeted a 24-year-old biracial model named Anthony Sears from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He invited the victim home and repeated his familiar procedure. 2 months later, on May 23, 1989, Jeffrey was formally sentenced to prison, with probation time to follow upon release. However, due to good behavior, he was released after just 2 months. In the span of 2 years, he killed 12 people undetected. Using the pretext of paying for photos, he lured victims home, committed his crimes, and preserved their skulls as sick trophies. He even attempted to use a microwave to dry out skulls, but an explosion forced him to find another method. Over time, Jeffrey went beyond strangling and began experimenting with chemicals. He drilled a hole into his victims' skulls, injecting acid or boiling water, attempting to turn them into living zombies with weak consciousness, incapable of resistance. This led him to believe he could fully control his victims, until one incident changed everything. On May 26, 1991, Jeffrey invited a newly immigrated 14-year-old boy named Konarak Synthesomphone to his apartment. After taking photographs, Jeffrey followed his usual process by sedating and drilling a hole into the boy's skull, injecting acid. After the boy lost consciousness, Jeffrey dragged him into the bedroom, where another body was yet to fully decompose. That night, Jeffrey went out drinking. Upon returning early in the morning, he was shocked to find Konarak naked and terrified, speaking with 3 women downstairs. The boy had managed to escape. Jeffrey quickly pretended to be the boy's boyfriend, put his arm around him, and told the women that this was his friend. However, they were suspicious and called the police. When the police arrived, Jeffrey remained calm, explaining that the boy was his 19-year-old boyfriend who had run outside inebriated. Although the 3 women were suspicious due to the boy's injuries and frightened expression, the police believed Jeffrey's story. He also showed the police private photos of himself and the boy. Due to the sensitive nature of the situation, the police believed him, even though the boy continued pleading for help. The boy might have survived, but due to cases involving people of color, the police were rather dismissive, as racial discrimination was still common at the time. The police asked the 3 women to leave, and the boy was subsequently forced by Jeffrey to return to the apartment. As expected, the boy's fate was sealed once he returned. The police presence had made Jeffrey both angry and fearful, especially with Konarak nearly escaping. Feeling threatened, he decided to inject another dose of acid into Konarak's skull, causing the boy immense pain before he passed away. For 2 years living in this apartment, Jeffrey continued to sink deeper into the horrors of his actions. The stench from apartment 213 increasingly caused complaints from neighbors. In such cases, he often explained it away by claiming his refrigerator was broken, so no one suspected anything further. In total, Jeffrey killed 17 people, including many teenagers and young men. The youngest victim was 14 and the oldest 36. Most of them were African American, Asian, and immigrants, making Dahmer's case one of the most shocking and haunting crime sprees. He perfected a sick preservation system for his victims' body parts. Skulls and bones, after bleaching, would be retained to form a grotesque collection in his apartment. Victims' hearts and livers were carefully preserved in his refrigerator. Jeffrey continued to satisfy his urges, repeatedly committing his crimes without leaving any clear traces for the police. However, as the saying goes, the more one does something wrong, the more likely they are to be caught. As in the beginning of this video, Tracy directly accused him, and this time, Jeffrey would face the punishment he deserved. At trial, Jeffrey faced the judges and the victims' families. His testimony threw the entire courtroom into a nightmare. Initially, when interrogated, he confessed to every crime, casually recounting his horrifying actions. However, during the trial, Jeffrey suddenly changed his testimony. He tried to plead insanity, claiming that his actions were due to mental instability and that he couldn't control himself during the crimes. Nonetheless, the prosecutor countered with strong evidence and expert testimony, proving Jeffrey was fully aware and in control of his actions. After days of debate, the trial concluded. The judge sentenced Jeffrey to 15 consecutive life sentences, equivalent to 957 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. This heavy sentence caused an uproar in the courtroom. Jeffrey sat motionless, expressionless, his gaze empty and chilling, sending shivers down the spectators. As Jeffrey was led out of the court, cries of anger and resentment from the victims' families echoed through the room. The trial ended, leaving an indelible mark on judicial history. Jeffrey would remain imprisoned forever, never escaping the severe punishment for his horrific crimes. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching this intriguing story. If you found this video captivating, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more thrilling crime stories. See you in the next videos. On December 1st, 1986, as the cold weather enveloped Newtown, Connecticut, a strange call was received at the local police station from a private investigator named Keith Mayo. With a worried tone, Keith explained that his client, Helle Crafts, had disappeared, and he requested police assistance in investigating the matter. Keith also revealed that he suspected Helle's husband, Richard, was closely involved in her disappearance. Initially, the police did not give the case much attention, assuming it was just a marital dispute, and that Helle might have left home for a few days to cool down. However, as they delved into the investigation, the police realized they were dealing with an exceptionally gruesome and brutal murder case. When Helle was found, only fragments of her body remained. With intense deduction and investigative efforts, this case became the first legal precedent in the U.S. to convict someone of murder without a body. What is the true story behind this case? Subscribe to our channel to discover the whole truth. Newtown, Connecticut is a small, peaceful town with an old-world charm, featuring winding paths that stretch through lush green forests. The town is renowned for its natural beauty, from crystal-clear lakes to fields of wildflowers in full bloom, creating a tranquil, picture-perfect scene. However, despite its beauty and serenity, Newtown was now faced with an unprecedented mystery. Life in this town would soon be shaken by a case that would disrupt everything and raise questions about what truly lay beneath this peaceful facade. Our informant in this case is Keith Mayo, a private investigator known in his field for his sharp mind and steely nerves. Helle Crafts had approached him in desperation, asking him to track her husband, Richard Crafts, a powerful and respected man, as she suspected him of infidelity. For months, Keith had gathered sufficient evidence of Richard's unfaithfulness. He tracked suspicious meetings and documented moments of Richard in close contact with other women. But since November 18th, Helle had stopped contacting Keith as she usually did. He reached out to her friends, but none of them had heard from her either. Realizing something was wrong, Keith reported the case to the police. At first, the police were skeptical, assuming this could just be a family feud and that Keith might be exaggerating the issue. Therefore, after receiving the report, they sent a team to investigate the next day. The first person to be interviewed was Richard Crafts, a pilot and also a volunteer police officer. When questioned about his wife's disappearance, he began recounting the story coherently. He and Helle were married and had 3 children together, but recently their family life had experienced some turmoil, as both of them suspected each other of infidelity. On the night of November 18th, everything seemed normal before he left the house. "We even discussed taking the kids to my sister's place for the weekend," Richard said firmly. However, when he woke up the next morning, Helle was nowhere to be found. He assumed she might have received an important work call and had to leave. As a flight attendant, Helle often traveled to many places around the world, so her being away for days was normal. Sometimes she would go for up to 10 days without notice, Richard emphasized, as if this justified his lack of concern over her immediate absence. At that time, both Richard and Helle had doubts about each other, leading to continuous arguments. For the moment, the police gathered no significant information from Richard. They decided to widen the scope of the investigation to include those around Helle. One of them was Mary Thomas, the Crafts family's 19-year-old nanny. Interestingly, she had quit her job shortly after learning of Helle's disappearance. This immediately caught the police's attention. During the interview, Mary appeared anxious and somewhat reluctant as she recounted what she knew. According to her, on the night before Helle was reported missing, she was suddenly awakened by a strange noise in the house. Initially, Mary didn't think much of it, assuming the sound was just something being knocked over by the snowstorm outside. However, as she learned of the investigation, she began to feel uneasy. The next morning, Richard informed her that the house had lost power the night before. Richard said that in such cold weather, being without heat was problematic, so he decided to take the family to his sister's house in Westport, about 35 kilometers away from their town. Mary did not see Helle at the time, so she asked Richard, "Isn't Mrs. Helle coming along?" Richard only replied briefly that his wife had left earlier. Mary found this strange since their children were still at home, but she didn't give it much thought. However, when they arrived at Richard's sister's house, he left the family there and quickly returned home. It wasn't until around 7 p.m. that Richard came back to pick everyone up. During their time at his sister's, Mary didn't see Helle at all. The following morning, when Mary was cleaning the bedroom, she noticed a large black stain on the carpet. At first glance, it looked like kerosene. When she asked Richard about it, he said it was indeed kerosene, and that he was planning to replace the carpet. Richard's strange demeanor made Mary feel frightened and uneasy, leading her to quit her job shortly afterward. The police noted that Mary's testimony hinted at Richard hiding something, but there was still no concrete evidence at this stage. Helle was a flight attendant known for her kind, hard-working nature and her love for her children. Outwardly, the Crafts family appeared happy with their 3 young children. But beneath the surface was a marriage full of cracks. Richard Crafts was a well-known figure in the community as a volunteer police officer. However, behind this image, he had a volatile temperament. According to Helle's friends, Richard was often controlling and exerted dominance within the family. He was also known for his interest in collecting weapons. Some friends and acquaintances of Helle recalled that she had been physically abused by Richard. She had frequently expressed her fear, saying that if anything ever happened to her, it would definitely not be an accident. Helle had intentions of divorcing him and wanted to end their marriage as soon as possible. Recently, friends had not been able to contact Helle, and she had not shown up for work. When they inquired with Richard, he claimed not to know where his wife was. At this point, the police divided their investigation into 2 directions. One team actively searched for clues through Helle's personal relationships, while the other conducted searches in the surrounding areas, as they could not rule out the possibility that Helle had encountered an accident elsewhere. During the search in town, a large number of police officers and tracking dogs were deployed, and Richard actively participated in the search as a family member. Although the search took place across many locations, all efforts yielded no specific results. When an investigation does not yield any results, it is common for the police to focus again on the victim's close relationships. Testimonies from friends and stories about Richard's threats could not be ignored by the police. With the current leads, they began to focus on Richard as the main suspect in the case. The police continued their deeper investigation into details related to Helle Crafts' disappearance, beginning to examine Richard's bank and phone records. Their initial discoveries revealed some suspicious irregularities. According to credit card records on November 13, 1986, just a few days before Helle's disappearance, Richard had spent $1,000 at an electronics store in Newtown to purchase a large freezer and an electric saw. The electric saw was readily available, but the freezer was not in stock and required about 4 days for delivery. This was puzzling behavior. Why would Richard need a new large freezer? The store owner recalled that when asked for personal information for delivery, Richard refused and said he would pick it up himself. 4 days later, Richard returned to the store and transported the freezer home himself. Additionally, credit card records showed that on November 18, 1986, Richard spent another $800 to rent a specific piece of equipment from a local company. Upon reviewing his phone records, police found that Richard had contacted a company specializing in wood chippers. In his conversation with the company, Richard mentioned that the recent snowstorm had caused trees to fall around his property, and he needed a wood chipper to handle the debris. He rented the most powerful machine, capable of shredding branches and logs with a diameter of up to 30 centimeters. On November 19, 1986, he also bought a new set of bedding. These details made the police highly suspicious, as all indications pointed to a sequence of unusual actions that took place immediately before and after Helle's disappearance. However, at that time, despite the evidence pointing towards Richard, the police still did not have enough concrete evidence to proceed with an arrest. The question of Helle's fate and the true purpose of Richard's strange actions remained an unsolved mystery. But there was still a place the police had yet to search. And you can probably guess. It was Richard's home. With this indirect evidence, the police had sufficient grounds to request a search warrant for his house. On December 26, after obtaining indirect evidence, the police were granted a warrant to search Richard's house. In the bedroom, investigators quickly noticed something unusual. Small, discolored droplets on the floor that suddenly stopped right outside the room's door, the place where the carpet had been removed. To determine if it was blood, an investigator quickly mixed luminol using available materials, such as hydrogen peroxide-based cleaners. They carefully sprayed the solution on the floor and turned off the lights. In the darkness, the investigators held their breath as faint blue glows appeared on the floor, revealing blood traces that had been meticulously cleaned. Notably, there was a large blood stain where the carpet had previously been placed, explaining the oil-like stain that the nanny had observed earlier. This sign made investigators believe that Helle might have been murdered in her bedroom, and then her body was dragged to the spot where the carpet had been. Her blood seeped through the carpet, leaving a black mark on the floor. In the bathroom, the police also found several large towels hanging. The samples tested also quickly showed a reaction to blood. With these discoveries, the police concluded that an attack had likely occurred and that Helle might have been killed. However, her body had still not been found, and under U.S. law, a suspect could not be convicted of murder without the victim's body. When the investigation was nearing a dead end, a breakthrough occurred when Joseph Hine, an environmental worker near the river area, arrived at the police station. He appeared tense and recounted an event he had witnessed early on the morning of November 20th, 1986, just a few days after Helle was reported missing. Hine explained that around 3:30 a.m. that morning, while clearing snow from the road in terrible weather, he saw a man dragging a large wood chipper and stopping by the Farmington riverbank. The conditions were harsh, with strong winds and heavy snowfall. Hine found it very strange, as the weather was not suitable for outdoor work, especially with a large piece of equipment like a wood chipper. However, at that moment, he did not report it immediately, thinking the man might be clearing fallen trees from the snowstorm. When Helle's disappearance became publicized through the media and the police delved deeper into the case, Hine realized the man he saw that night might be related to the case. He immediately went to the police station to provide detailed information. The police provided Hine with several identification photos and asked him if he recognized anyone. Hine scanned through each photo until his gaze stopped on a familiar face. "That's the one," Hine said confidently as he pointed to Richard Crafts' picture. Joseph Hine's identification marked a turning point in the investigation. The police recalled that Richard had rented a wood chipper from a local company, and the pieces of the puzzle started coming together. The police inferred that, after killing Helle, Richard had hidden her body in a freezer, then brought it outside and used the wood chipper to destroy all evidence. If so, it would be nearly impossible for anyone to find Helle. To verify the hypothesis that Richard used a wood chipper to dispose of Helle's body, the police decided to conduct an experiment. They rented a wood chipper similar to the one Richard had rented and purchased a pig for the test. The police and forensic team conducted the experiment in a controlled area. When the frozen pig was fed into the machine, it worked very efficiently. The pig's body was shredded into small pieces of flesh and bone, with some parts flung nearly 5 meters away. This experiment demonstrated that a human body could indeed be destroyed by a woodchipper if it were frozen. Based on the results of the experiment, the police immediately organized a search along the Farmington River, where Joseph Hine had seen Richard using the woodchipper. 2 search teams were deployed, one of divers, scouring the riverbed, and another trawling near the riverbank, looking for even the smallest traces. The search continued in harsh conditions, with mud and freezing water. After 2 days of intense and hopeful work, the investigators found a series of grim evidence. First, they discovered over 2,600 small bone fragments, pieces of wrinkled and discolored skin due to prolonged exposure to cold water, a fingernail, 2 teeth, and some hair. All were too small to reconstruct into any complete part of a body. Notably, among the retrieved items, police found a chainsaw at the bottom of the river. The serial number on the saw matched the purchase receipt Richard had from earlier. At that time, DNA analysis technology had not yet been developed, so the identification of body fragments had to be done manually and meticulously. The police and forensic team began their work by comparing each bone fragment, hair strand, and tooth with Helle Crafts' dental records and identifying features. Each specimen was examined under a microscope, and minute details such as bone structure and unique features on the teeth were carefully matched. A team of dental experts was brought in to compare the isolated teeth with Helle's dental records. The characteristics of the found teeth showed significant similarity to the victim, but for a formal conclusion, they needed to combine additional evidence. The long hairs discovered matched the color and length of Helle's distinctive hair. To be certain, these hairs were compared with samples from her personal comb and hairbrush, and the results were a complete match. The bone samples were also carefully compared in terms of size, thickness, and shape, and the results aligned with Helle's age, gender, and height. The police's hypothesis became clearer than ever. They believed that Richard had premeditated his wife's murder due to marital conflicts and the threats Helle had shared with her friends. The most likely scenario was that Richard unexpectedly struck Helle on the head in the bedroom, then dragged her onto the carpet and moved her into the bathroom to dismember her with an electric saw. The purchase of the large freezer indicated that Richard meticulously planned this act. He could have stored her body in the freezer for a time to avoid any smells or unusual signs in the house, and the freezer also made it possible for the woodchipper to function optimally, as it works best with solid materials. On November 18th, when Richard rented the woodchipper, his disposal plan was set in motion. Amidst the heavy snow and blizzard, he took the frozen body parts to the riverbank and used the woodchipper to shred the remains, intending to eliminate all traces of Helle. Despite facing a series of incriminating evidence, Richard Crafts remained steadfast in denying all allegations. He maintained a cold demeanor and insisted he had no involvement in Helle's disappearance. The investigation and the legal case preparation spanned months, with circumstantial evidence like blood stains in the house, witness testimonies, and the rented woodchipper, all piecing together the brutal story of Helle's death. On May 13, 1987, Richard Crafts was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case quickly garnered public attention, not only for the brutal nature of the crime, but because it was the first in the U.S. to be tried without a complete body of the victim. The trial began on May 21, 1988, at the Danbury County Court, Connecticut. Richard entered the courtroom with a cold gaze, occasionally glancing at the jury but showing no emotion. The prosecutor presented each piece of circumstantial evidence, from the blood stains on the carpet and floor, the large freezer purchase, to the rented woodchipper. They argued that every detail pointed to Richard as the perpetrator who planned and executed the crime with calculated coldness. Witness statements from people like Joseph Hine, who saw Richard using the woodchipper during a snowstorm, were considered crucial evidence. Combined with the traces found along the Farmington River, the prosecutor emphasized that Richard's actions were enough to convince them that Helle had been killed and disposed of. Richard's defense lawyer attempted to argue that the evidence was insufficient, claiming that the absence of Helle's complete body raised doubts about the accusation's accuracy. However, the overwhelming evidence left this argument unconvincing. After numerous trial sessions, on November 21, 1989, the jury concluded that Richard Crafts was guilty. This decision marked a milestone in legal history, establishing a precedent that a murder case could be convicted without a victim's body. Richard Crafts was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, despite facing a severe punishment, Richard remained calm and showed no sign of remorse or emotion. This case shocked the public, not only for its brutal nature, but also for its pioneering legal approach in convicting a murderer without a body. It served as proof of the power of circumstantial evidence and the skill of investigators in piecing together seemingly unrelated clues into a complete picture. The story of Helle Crafts' case became a symbol of justice being served even when the clearest evidence was not present. It also served as a cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the severe consequences when domestic violence crosses all boundaries. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed the video, found it informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss future stories. August 4th, 1985. It was a Sunday in Connecticut. Tom Barrett went to visit a close friend and colleague, Ellen Sherman, as he hadn't been able to reach her by phone earlier. When he arrived at the door, the lights were still on inside, and the air conditioner outside was running, but no one answered. Feeling worried for his friend, Tom circled the house and pried open a window to climb inside. The room was quiet except for the family dog barking incessantly, but Ellen was nowhere to be seen. Tom cautiously headed toward the bedroom, sensing that something was terribly wrong. As he pushed open the bedroom door, Tom froze at the sight of Ellen lying naked and motionless on the bed, her body cold and no longer breathing. Shocked and terrified, Tom shakily dialed the police.
I think Ellen Sherman is dead. Please come quickly. Something is very wrong here.
Upon receiving the report, the police immediately arrived at the scene. The investigators, upon approaching the victim, noticed unusual details and raised serious questions about the cause of Ellen's death. So, what exactly happened? Subscribe to our channel to join us as we uncover the mysteries behind this case. The crime took place in Connecticut, USA, a region known for its peaceful beauty and green forests surrounding residential areas. It's a quiet, safe place where murders are rare. In the small town where Ellen Sherman lived, people were absorbed in their slow-paced lives. Everyone believed that the tree-lined streets and happy homes would never be darkened by the shadow of crime. But the shocking crime shattered the town's peaceful atmosphere, raising countless unanswered questions and turning this place into the focus of public attention. The victim was identified as Ellen Sherman, 38, a gentle, intelligent woman with a warm smile and a caring nature. She worked in human resources at a packaging company in town. Ellen and her husband, Edward Sherman, got married in the early 80s. Initially, their life was harmonious, and they were a couple admired by many. Both had stable careers, lived in a luxurious house in Connecticut, and were often seen together at social gatherings. Edward Sherman, 45, was a charming and successful businessman. Despite his calm appearance, he was known for his extramarital affairs and lived quite freely. Edward often attended parties and went on trips with friends, sometimes leaving his wife alone at home. At the time of the incident, Edward had left home on Friday afternoon, August 2nd, to hang out with 4 close friends. This trip was a chance to relax and have fun after some recent stress. The next morning, Edward suddenly remembered that his yacht might still be running at the dock. Thinking this would be costly or cause damage if left on, he decided to call Ellen to ask her to check, but no one picked up. On August 4th, Edward started to feel uneasy after repeatedly calling home without getting any response from Ellen. That evening, he called a neighbor, Sarah Blake, asking her to check on the house, but Sarah was busy and away. Left with no other choice, Edward called Ellen's colleague, Tom Barrett, asking for his help. Tom agreed to check on the house. When he arrived, he noticed that the lights were on inside, and the air conditioner was still running, a sign that someone was home. However, the front door was locked, and despite ringing the bell multiple times, Tom received no response from inside. Worried about Ellen, he walked around the house trying to look inside through the windows, but the living room windows were fully curtained, making it impossible for him to see anything. His sense of unease growing, Tom decided to break in through a hallway window. As soon as he entered, he heard the family dog barking incessantly and noticed dog feces scattered on the floor, suggesting that no one had cleaned in days. A bad feeling overwhelmed Tom, pushing him toward the bedroom to check. Upon entering, he was hit by a chilling draft and an unpleasant smell. Approaching the bed, Tom froze in horror at the sight of Ellen lying there motionless, completely unclothed. Shocked and terrified, he fled the house and immediately called the police to report the crime. The police quickly arrived and secured the scene. After conducting a thorough inspection of the house, investigators confirmed there were no signs of forced entry. All the windows and doors were intact, except for the hallway window that Tom had pried open to enter. This suggested that the perpetrator might have been someone known to the victim or had used a plausible reason, like plumbing repairs, to be invited into the house. Ellen's body lay cold on the bed. Tragically, she was visibly pregnant at the time, her belly noticeably large. There were 3 ligature marks on her neck, 2 of which were deep, indicating strong force. Beads from Ellen's necklace were scattered across the floor. Beside the bed, police found a torn pair of blue underwear identified as belonging to the victim. Additionally, there was a white bra and white underwear. There were no signs of struggle or scuffle around the body, except for the ligature marks on Ellen's neck. No other injuries were found on her body. The scene showed no signs of being ransacked or searched. The room was entirely intact, with no valuables or cash missing, leading police to rule out robbery as a motive. The bed sheets had various stains, including semen and saliva. Some semen stains appeared partially wiped, possibly existing from earlier. These traces could provide valuable information, but unfortunately, DNA technology at the time wasn't advanced enough, complicating the investigation process. Regarding the murder weapon, investigators noted that the jagged Z pattern on Ellen's neck matched the design of her underwear, and tests confirmed that the elastic from the underwear was used by the perpetrator to strangle Ellen to death. Additionally, fragments of human skin were found under Ellen's fingernails, suggesting she might have tried to resist or made contact with the killer in her final moments. Apart from this evidence, no other significant clues were found at the scene. Initially, police hypothesized that Ellen might have invited a friend or lover into the house while her husband, Edward, was away for the weekend. This theory was based on the open relationship between Ellen and her husband and the absence of forced entry signs at the scene. However, this hypothesis didn't explain why no foreign fingerprints were found, a major inconsistency. It would be nearly impossible for an outsider to completely erase all traces after the murder, especially given the numerous items in the house that could retain fingerprints. From the start, the case faced significant challenges, leading the police to focus on investigating relationships surrounding the victim. When Ellen's body was discovered, they quickly contacted Edward Sherman, who was still enjoying his vacation at sea with friends. Police requested that Edward and his friends sail to the nearest Coast Guard station for questioning. After a brief interrogation, his 4 friends were released, while Edward was asked to return for periodic questioning. During questioning, police asked about the skin fragments found under Ellen's nails. Initially, Edward appeared contemplative, but then quickly replied that he had asked Ellen to scratch his back the day before, which might have left the skin fragments under her nails. This answer surprised investigators as no one had mentioned the origin of the skin fragments. This was a suspicious detail that made the police question Edward's honesty. Additionally, investigators noticed 2 deep scratches on Edward's wrists. He explained that he had accidentally scraped his wrist on a fence at work. However, this answer was unconvincing, and it seemed like he was hiding something. Furthermore, Bill, a friend of Edward's, recalled that on their sea trip, despite the hot weather, everyone was wearing short clothes, yet Edward wore long sleeves and pants. When asked why, Edward replied that he was afraid of sunburn. Everyone was puzzled, but didn't question him further. Investigators realized he might have been intentionally hiding scratches on his arms. This friend also mentioned that the original plan was to leave at 10 p.m. on August 2nd, but Edward repeatedly urged the group to leave earlier, and they departed at 7:30 p.m. Around 7 p.m. that evening, Edward went to a friend's house to get ready for the trip. He borrowed his friend's landline phone to call his wife at home, even though the friend's daughter was waiting to use the phone to call her friends. Edward told his wife on the phone, "Honey, if you need anything, ask the neighbors for help. I'm about to set off." This call initially seemed casual, but became suspicious as the police later scrutinized it. During the sea trip, Edward continued calling home to express affection, an action that initially appeared caring, but, when viewed in the investigation's context, added another layer of suspicion. At this point, everyone might think Edward seemed like the ideal husband, but he actually led a double life. Edward frequently attended secret debauched parties with prostitutes. Ellen knew about this, but wasn't angry, as she also found her own way to fulfill her needs with other men. This arrangement kept their marriage stable, at least in the public's eyes. But their peace began to crumble when a new secret was revealed. Edward had a daughter with his former lover, Nancy Prescott, and their relationship had been ambiguous for years. In reality, Ellen was still Edward's legal wife. She couldn't accept this, so she chose to become pregnant to save their marriage, and demanded he end all ties with his lover. Ellen hoped Edward would calm down and return to her to build a happy life together. She was willing to overlook everything and forgive him, as long as he came back to her. But Nancy Prescott pushed Edward to make a choice, asking him to divorce Ellen, marry her, and raise their child together. If Edward refused, Nancy threatened to sever their relationship entirely. However, most of the assets, from the house and company to 2 cars, were owned by Ellen. If divorced, Edward would lose everything and be left nearly empty-handed. So, after careful consideration, Edward decided to return to Ellen, agree to break up with Nancy, and commit to financially supporting their child. Ellen felt happy because she had finally won the love triangle. She believed Edward had chosen family and was ready for a new life. But that peace didn't last long, and Ellen's nightmare had only just begun. According to neighbors, Edward frequently argued with and physically assaulted Ellen. 2 months before the crime, on Father's Day, their argument became intense, with Edward, in a fit of anger, repeatedly striking Ellen, leaving her with numerous bruises. After the Father's Day fight, Edward and Ellen's relationship seemed beyond repair. Ellen confided in her close friend that she had lost all patience and was determined to get a divorce. She no longer wanted to share assets, the house, or custody with Edward. Before the sea trip, Edward and Ellen's relationship seemed to have softened a bit, but perhaps that was just a facade. Police believed this might be the reason Edward decided to end everything in the most ruthless way. But for now, it was just a hypothesis. Returning to the phone call on August 2nd when Edward advised his wife before leaving for the sea. A new turning point in the investigation came when Jamie, an 8-year-old daughter of a friend named Bill, revealed critical information. When Edward was eager to call home, the girl was waiting to use the phone, but Edward interrupted, saying he had something very important to do. Feeling annoyed, Jamie decided to run to the next room. Out of curiosity, she quietly picked up the phone on the other line to listen what Edward was saying to his wife. What she heard shocked even the police. The other end was completely silent, with only a beep-beep tone, indicating the call was never connected. Edward was likely talking to himself, pretending the call took place to create an alibi. From Jamie's testimony, the police suspected that Edward's loving calls to his wife while on his trip were actually faked. This immediately made Edward the primary suspect in Ellen's case. However, Ellen's autopsy results poured cold water on the investigators at the time. The time of death was estimated to be between the night of August 2nd and 7 a.m. on August 4th, precisely when Edward was with his friends on the yacht. This rendered all previous suspect theories inaccurate. Edward temporarily escaped suspicion, but the police still felt uneasy about him. Why did he intentionally speak when no one was on the other line? When asked about this, Edward denied Bill's daughter's claim, saying she disliked him for interrupting her when she was waiting for the phone, so she made it up. Bill's daughter was only 8 years old, so her reliability wasn't high. She could have lied. The case gradually became a dead end, and all clues involving Edward seemed to fade, leaving investigators at an impasse. Before solving the case, police were shocked by Edward's actions right after his wife's death. He inherited his wife's entire estate, including the company, their shared house, and quickly splurged on a yacht and luxury car. Additionally, he publicly rekindled his relationship with Nancy, his old lover, shortly afterward. In everyone's eyes, Edward didn't seem to grieve his deceased wife. Instead, he lived even more lavishly, as if nothing had happened. At that time, despite numerous challenges, the police never gave up. The investigation into Ellen's death stretched over 2 years, during which police secretly gathered evidence, summoned dozens of witnesses, and attempted to trace all of Ellen's relationships. Finally, a woman named Lisa, Edward's neighbor, provided a crucial clue, leading to a significant turning point in the case. According to Lisa, when she watched the movie Blackout on TV, she recalled a detail she had forgotten to report to the police. On the morning of Friday, August 2nd, 1985, she happened to meet Edward in a video store. During a short conversation, Edward recommended Blackout to Lisa, a horror movie about a killer manipulating the crime scene by lowering the AC temperature to slow body decomposition, making it harder for forensics to determine the time of death. When the police heard this detail, they immediately realized Edward might have used the same tactic to cover up his crime. They decided to re-examine the entire scene, starting by interviewing the first person to enter the room where Ellen's body was found. Tom recalled that when he opened the bedroom door, a blast of cold air hit him, as the AC in the room was likely set to the lowest temperature. When he discovered Ellen lying motionless on the bed, he ran out in fear to call the police and forgot to close the door, causing the room temperature to rise quickly by the time the police arrived. Forensic experts noted that the extremely low AC temperature could slow decomposition, making Ellen's time of death harder to determine. Police began analyzing and carefully reviewing clues from 2 years earlier on the victim's body. To be certain, investigators conducted decomposition tests on real samples, examining them under regular and extremely low AC conditions. Through meticulous calculations and careful research, they confirmed Ellen had died shortly after Friday lunch, not on Friday night or Saturday morning as initially thought, and Edward had enough time to commit the crime before leaving with his friends that evening. These findings led the police to a new theory. Edward killed his wife on Friday afternoon, cleaned up the scene, set the air conditioner to an extremely low temperature to delay decomposition, then created an alibi by hurriedly leaving with his friends and continuously calling his wife. The police concluded that Edward had tried to create an illusion that his wife was still alive throughout his trip to cover up his crime. Every detail and timeline was part of his plan to create a perfect alibi. Edward thought his plan would succeed, but little did he know that a few boastful words and minor oversights would expose him, bringing a major breakthrough to the investigation and trapping him within the grasp of justice. Although the case happened in 1985, it wasn't until June 1990 that the police had enough evidence and legal grounds to bring Edward Sherman to trial. But Edward continuously denied all related charges, insisting he was innocent. Since all the evidence was circumstantial, charging Edward was a difficult task. To convince the court, the police reenacted the entire crime scene, detailing every action they believed Edward took to murder his wife. Edward had carefully planned everything beforehand, intending to evade guilt by taking cues from the movie Blackout. He thought his plan was flawless and was excited about the wealth he would inherit. This made him enthusiastically share the movie with his neighbor when they met. Based on the marks on Ellen's neck and her scratch marks, Edward had strangled his wife while she lay in bed. Since he had planned it from the start, he acted with brutality and coldness. During her struggle, Ellen scratched his arm, leaving deep marks, and broke the jewelry around her neck. Edward then stripped her and used her underwear to create fake ligature marks to mislead the police into thinking it was a sexual assault. He set the air conditioner to the lowest level to slow down body decomposition and extend the time of death, creating an alibi. He then exited through the window to make it appear as though he had left for the trip and that the victim was alone and had locked up. Edward then persuaded his friends to depart earlier and pretended to call his wife in front of everyone. In the days after the crime, Edward continued to maintain his worried facade, constantly calling his friend to check on the house adding layers to his seemingly perfect plan. The police spent 6 hours in court reenacting this sequence, connecting all the indirect clues. The jury and judge saw a complete chain of evidence, based on witness testimonies and the forensic experts' sharp hypothesis. On November 4, 1991, the 7-week trial concluded as the jury unanimously found Edward guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to 50 years in prison. Edward continued to deny his guilt, but his stubbornness and deception couldn't save him from justice. After serving 3 years, he died suddenly in prison from a heart attack. The Edward Sherman case, though closed, left a profound sense of injustice. Without the 2 key witnesses who brought the truth to light, the perpetrator might still be leisurely vacationing on some yacht. The story of how Edward planned to kill his wife and used the air conditioner to conceal her time of death became a widespread topic of discussion. Many marveled at the cunning of his tricks and worried about how close he came to escaping justice. The media continuously covered and analyzed the case, sparking debates on whether the legal and investigative systems could improve to apprehend Edward sooner. Ultimately, the Edward Sherman case became a profound lesson for the community about the darker sides of human nature and a wake-up call on protecting those who suffer from domestic abuse. Ellen's family and friends hoped that justice had, in some measure, been served, allowing Ellen's soul to rest in peace. This concludes the video. Thank you for watching this thrilling story. If you found this video captivating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to catch more exciting crime stories. See you in the next video.